Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing the book acquiring tag. I can't remember who tagged me in this, I am so sorry, but I will link whoever it was down below. And this was originally created by Kristen at Enter the Book, which again will be linked down below. And this is a tag just talking about how do you acquire books, how do you manage and control your TBR. And given that we're about to be going into 2024 and one of my major goals is to try and get a handle back on my TBR now that I'm reading regularly again and reading with the kind of variety that I used to, I thought that this was a really fitting time to kind of critically assess what books do I have, how do I get them, and how do I control how many I have. So the first question is, do you plan your book purchases ahead or impulse buy? I think I'm a little bit of a 50-50, but I would like to move more towards the book purchase sort of planning as such. The reason for this was I found that I would mark loads of things as want to read on Goodreads, and that used to be completely out of control. Like, it had over 700 books on it, which I've now got down to like 300. But then what would happen was I'd go to a bookstore and find a completely different collection of books that I was interested in the moment and impulse buy those, and so I was never really actually purchasing the books I want to read, which is silly because they've been marked as want to read for years in some cases. So I'm trying to make a bit more of a conscious effort to keep an eye out for books that I already know exist, that I already know that I'm interested in reading at some point and I just need to acquire. Obviously it is fun to impulse buy, and it is important to be open to new avenues of finding out books, and it's always fun to find something that you weren't expecting in a bookshop, but I'm trying to make the majority of my purchasing being things that are sort of a bit more consciously thought about. Book 2 is, how do you decide what books to buy? I think a lot of it, like I said, was just sort of, I have an awareness of books I'm interested in, and when I'm in a bookstore and I see them, I go for them. When I buy audiobooks, I do try to get ones that I already have in physical form as a way of trying to get through my TBR a little bit more. I don't like having audiobooks that I don't have the physical one with as well, just in case I don't like the narrator, and then I find it quite difficult to then be able to read them. And a lot of it, I'm very conscious of sort of the ratios that I have on my shelves. There was a period of time where I was buying a lot of non-fiction but not reading a lot of non-fiction, and then that got a little out of control. So I'm trying to be mindful of what kind of ratios I have and making sure that my TBRs and my reading habits more accurately reflect what is on my shelf, but also my purchasing habits more accurately reflect what my reading tends to be. The next question is, what is your philosophy and where do you shop? Online versus in person, large, small, physical, digital, etc. So generally, I have a Kindle and I have an Audible account, so I obviously do give a big chunk of money to Amazon. Because of that fact, I try to therefore not buy any physical books from Amazon myself, and instead I focus on physical bookstores, and I really like going in person. Book mail doesn't really excite me as much as actually physically going to the store and getting to browse and wander. I do love Waterstones, they're probably the place that I frequent the most, but I'm also a huge fan of independent bookstores. My favourite one in the UK is Topping & Co. There's one in Ely, which is relatively close to where I live, and I go there relatively regularly. Me and my mum actually have our annual, just before Christmas, Ely Topping & Co. trip with tea, cake, dinner, and buying lots of books coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm really excited about it. So yeah, I do try and favour independent bookstores as much as possible. In terms of what I buy where, Kindle just seems to be sort of whatever pops up, and I do really like it for romance books because it's a little bit shorter, or sorry, they're a little bit cheaper, and I used to have a Kindle Unlimited subscription that definitely helped with that. Just because I read them so quickly, I really resent paying like full price for them. I also really like the Works for sort of spur of the moment ones or for romance books, because again, it's a little bit cheaper, you can get quite good deals, and it's helpful because when you blitz a book in an afternoon, I feel a little bit resentful paying like £9 for it. The next question is, what about little free libraries? What do you think about them? Have you used one? Why or why not? I like the fact that they exist, but I do think that they suffer a similar problem to charity shops, which is basically just the same titles over and over again appear there. And like, that's fantastic if you are interested in those kind of books. There tend to be a lot of big name authors like James Patterson or Patricia Cornwell or like Agatha Christie's and things like that in them. I personally don't tend to read a lot of the books that appear in these kind of places, and I don't have that much interest in like, there aren't any particularly locally to me. I do donate a good number of books to charity shops, whether they be ones that I've read that I'm no longer interested in keeping on my shelves, or like I go through my TBR shelf quite regularly and unhaul books that I know I've lost interest in or I'm not going to end up reading. So I do donate those to charity shops very often, and we do have a little like take a book, leave a book at work, which doesn't get used as much as I'd like, but then also I'm not taking any books from it, so I guess I'm part of the problem. The next question is, how do you feel after acquiring a book, and do you like to share, like in a book haul or a diary? I'm very bad at keeping track of what I have amassed. I do, as in just like the time frames of it, I do have a very intensely organized TBR list on Goodreads, which helps me track what books I've bought and what books I'm interested in buying, just as I don't end up with duplicates, because that definitely was in danger of happening, and that's been like that for absolute years. I do film book hauls quite regularly on this channel, but I don't have a specific number that I'm interested in hitting. I don't sort of keep them separate until that point. Quite often they'll end up featuring in TBRs or wrap-ups before I've even got to the book haul aspect. Like, I'm very disorganized in that area, but I think that's okay. Like, for me, book hauls just sort of, I go through splurges where I don't buy books for ages, and then I will, like, the shelves get depleted and I'm like, right, I'm now gonna go and like buy a load in quite quick succession, and then I'll do a book haul from those. So I hope that made sense. So sort of somewhat tracked. How do you feel about looking at your books that you haven't read? Does it matter if it's currently a lot or a little amount? I generally quite like my TBR shelves. They fill me with sort of hope and possibility, and I really like looking at a stack of books that I know I haven't read yet that I'm excited by. Where it then becomes problematic for me is when they've been on my shelf for a very long time. So I am trying to be quite conscious about trying to rotate my books, and especially having had this hiatus of 2 years of reading, coming back and seeing some books that were on my shelf from way before then, I am trying to get through some stuff that has been maybe lounging, gathering dust in the background. So I don't feel guilty about it. I do want to try and get my TBR to a slightly more manageable number. It had sort of grown quite a lot, especially in 2020 during lockdown, where I was buying a lot of books. I was reading a lot of books, but I was buying a lot of books as well. So at one point it was 180. We're now down to 150, and my goal by the end of 2024 is to have it in the like 2 digits, in the like 70 to 80 range by the end of 2024. Is going to allow me to still buy some books. Right, how do you decide what number of unread books is the right amount? Right amount is such a weird concept. For me, I think it's the variety that I read means that there are a couple of options on my shelf for each kind of genre. So I probably have like 2 or 3 books for every single genre that I'm interested in. But when you're interested in the number of genres and subgenres I am, that ends up being quite a large list. So, you know, I've got maybe 3 or 4 history books on my shelves, but then I also have the same for nature writing, science, and then paleontology, and then like historical and fantasy and sci-fi, and like it's quite easy for it to sort of start to spiral a little bit. I think where it becomes a little bit of a problem is when I keep buying books for an area and not reading them. So, you know, 3 or 4 history books is fine, but when it gets like 10 or 15, there's definitely a problem there, and I need to focus it a little bit more. What I also do as well is I have a few classics collections that like I'm happy to buy when I find them cheaply, and I sort of quite often bulk buy them because you get great deals on like World of Books. Alma Classics does like bundles of 10 for quite cheap, and I'm okay with the fact that they sit up there for a little bit. My classics TBR definitely like fluctuates with its size, but I am going to get through them and I am going to read them at some point. And even if I like don't end up finishing or don't enjoy them, I'm adding them to my classics collection because that's a bit more of a like aesthetic thing where I really like the books and I like having them, and I like having them on my shelves, and I think they're very pretty and they're kind of treated more like works of art rather than just the stories themselves. So I don't feel guilty about my classics collection sort of lounging on the TBR shelf because I will get to them eventually. The next question is, do you have a TBR game or process for reading them? I sort of go through spurts and phases of doing stuff. I've done lots of little challenges on my channel before. I love readathons for making me like look at my shelves and find books that I like wasn't going to prioritize reading, and making me really think about them. Like I said, I've been trying to be more mindful of my ratios. So what I did for October, which was the first time I've ever done it, was I actually looked at what did I have on my TBR shelf, broke it into non-fiction, classics, and then like standard fiction, and then made sure that my TBR reflected the percentages seen on my shelf. And I think I'm gonna keep trying to do that for next year with like a few monthly challenges here or there, notwithstanding, just to stop this like non-fiction lounging or classics lounging kind of thing that was starting to happen, and just making sure that I'm kind of being a little bit more mindful. Having said that, if like the mood strikes me to just read a bunch of non-fiction, like I'm clearly going to do that. It's not going to be hard and fast rules, but it just helps to structure things a little bit and stops things from just kind of lounging, because my classics reading especially definitely took a bit of a nosedive in 2021. So that was something which I really want to like boost back up again, and I think having ratios will really help with that. The next question is, do you have a book buying problem? If so, what is the nature of it and can it be adjusted? I don't think so. It's my money. Like, I've earned it. You know, I'm not running myself into debt with buying books. Do I sometimes go out and splurge when I potentially shouldn't? Yes, who doesn't? But I think, you know, even if they end up getting unhauled and they end up in a charity shop, at that point I was interested in reading them. Sometimes it's years later that they get unhauled. I'm never buying a book for the sake of it. And yeah, they are lovely. And I think as far as like problematic habits go, book buying is one of the like least problematic that there could be. So I don't have a problem. I'm perfectly happy with my reading. I could potentially use libraries more, but I don't. And you know, I like owning the books, sorry. And I think a lot of people sort of empathise with that. Tag. Oh, that was the last question. Oh, we ended on a bit of a bummer. I'm so sorry. Okay, tag 2 or 3 other people to ponder their book buying process. I will just put the people in the tags below because my mind is completely blanking today, and I definitely just need to go grab a cup of coffee. So let me know what you think. How do you acquire books, and sort of what is your energy and your vibe about your book buying? Like, is it something you feel guilt about? Is it something that, like me, you're sort of happy with? I almost feel like my book buying and my book reading is two slightly different hobbies, and I really love going to a bookstore with like my parents or my friends and treating it as like a proper, we're going to spend 3 hours here. It's an activity on an afternoon that we do once every couple of months, and I'm going to walk out with like 8 books, and that's perfectly okay because it is like an afternoon in its own right, which is essentially what I'm going to be doing in a couple of weeks time. And yeah, so I'm perfectly happy with how I interact with my book buying habits. But yeah, do let me know what you think down below, and if you've done this tag before, please do feel free to link it. Other than that, have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye.